Okay, here we are. We are now having our very first live conversation. My name is Laura May Lindo. I am the MPP for Kitchener Center, and I am blessed to be here today talking to Zahra, who works in my office. Hello, Zahra.
Hello.
Um, the reason that we are coming together is because Butila Carpoche, who is one of my colleagues and also our mental health critic, has asked that we spend this week thinking through mental health changes that we've seen, the kinds of supports that folks need, all of those kinds of things. We're in the midst of the second wave of the pandemic. It is hitting us much harder and in different ways. And I wanted to actually start with what is in my sphere of influence, and that includes the folks that are with me in my office. So Zahra, this is totally unscripted for anybody who's watching it, totally unscripted. Just a couple minutes of you and I checking in with each other first, and then thinking through some of the changes that we've seen in the kinds of calls that we're getting, in the kinds of needs that folks have, that kind of stuff. Does that sound like a fair starting point?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think that's the way to go.
Beautiful. Well, listen, I'm going to start with you. How are you doing, man?
Well, I mean, we're feeling it too, like just in our own family. We are both working, and as parents of two children, a teenager and an 8-year-old. The 8-year-old is not super independent at learning, and so she needs a lot of supervision. And so that means that one person, we have to divide it up, and it's difficult. It's difficult to sort of focus on work and supervise a child while they're trying to receive an online education. And like the educators are doing the best they can, but it is there's some burnout. And as you know, I've had an injury recently, and so it meant that all of that supervision and assistance for her was shouldered by one parent. And I'm sure as a single parent, you can understand that that's like really hard. And there's mental health issues definitely going on in our house, between the children and the adults. And we're also in a situation where we actually feel like we're privileged and we have a lot more going on than a lot of folks. I think about the ones that are sharing tablets and or don't have a tablet at all, or don't have Wi-Fi, or are struggling with food security. Like, I mean, there's just so many pressures that given our own situation, I feel very worried about what's going on with other families and other individuals out there.
Yeah, it's interesting too, Zahra, because oftentimes when we have our work hours, even in the beginning, right, during the first wave and the office was closed when you first came on board, the office was already closed, we were working virtually, but there was still a bit of a separation between our parenting life and our work life. And I know during the beginning of the second wave, when the schools were still closed, my first day I took to Twitter, just not so much in frustration, but just realizing in that moment at like 10 in the morning that this was not going to be sustainable, right? Being able to, the balance between your work and your parenting is particularly difficult for me, of course, as a single mama, as you were saying, is hard on a whole other kind of level. And as much as people say to me, don't worry about it. Like, I got a lot of really positive messages from folks, and still do, where people are reaching out and they're like, Laura May, don't worry, just chill out. If your kid can't be online, it's okay. If if you need to take a break, it's okay. But I find myself, and I'm curious about whether this is the same for you, I find myself in all sincerity struggling with the fact that of my 3 kids, the one that I have to spend the most time with is a little Black boy in a world where little Black boys don't fare well if they don't work better, harder, faster, longer than everybody else. And so is it just me? Am I just being a little extra, or are you feeling that kind of pressure too?
I'm definitely, I think, as a racialized woman, and my kids are also they're mixed, and so, but they're definitely racialized. Their name, there's also the Islamophobia. They've got, the last name Habib in there, and so there's a variety of things that sort of play into why we feel this pressure, I think, to just keep them going. Like, there's this one part of my mind that's saying it doesn't matter. It's great. Yeah. What's the big deal? It's a pandemic. There are so many accommodations that will be made, but the question does enter into my mind, but will that accommodation be made for my kids?
Yeah.
And so I think that is definitely a factor. And I actually didn't realize it until you said it, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, and isn't that interesting? Because we don't always give ourselves that time and that space to really check in, right? Like, which is another shout out to others that are leaders out in community. Hey, this is Jaden.
Hi,
Here's my little guy. Jaden, I'm actually live right now. So if you want to ask me something, it's going to have to be quick because I have to be going.
Why do we have the iPads we can't even use?
Oh, we'll work that out. So the other struggle that we're having at home is that there are a couple computers, like older iPads that I've tried to set him up with. They don't work now. And with things shut down, I can't fix them, but he knows of them. And so he knows that he would, like right now he's using one of his siblings' computers so that I can be doing this live broadcast.
Right.
And so as you balance it out, it's not so easy, right?
Right.
But what I was saying, I wanted to just do a little shout out for some of the community leaders out there, because we spend so much time. Yep. We spend so much time trying to hold community to the best of our ability, no matter what mistakes and such we made. Don't worry about that. But we try and hold everybody, and we don't necessarily check in as leaders to make sure that we're doing okay, make sure that we're not putting ourselves under additional pressure. And then we don't necessarily have the time and the space to be able to check in as leaders together, right? So just a little shout out and discussion about that. But that also leads me to my next question for you before we wrap up, because this is just supposed to be a little short conversation and check-in. When I think about the kinds of calls that we typically get in the office, I have been finding that without the support, like without being at Queen's Park right now, where I'm in a space where I can actually advocate for paid sick days or advocate for, a real pause on evictions, right? So we're not throwing people into this tribunal when they don't necessarily, as you were saying, always have access to solid Wi-Fi or have a computer handy, or they can't call in for some reason, right? Without having that advocacy space as the MPP, I struggle, right? When folks are calling the office and I don't have the tools accessible to be able to help them. And I'm seeing a rise in need, right? Like there's a whole middle group of people who never anticipated that they would necessarily be off work for what it's close to a year, or didn't expect that they would have to rely on EI or CERB, or find out that they had to pay CERB back if they did in fact have to do that, or they're struggling with keeping their small businesses open in the midst of the pandemic. What are you hearing, like both in the office and sort of on the ground? How are you feeling about that? Is there a shift in the kinds of calls we're getting and such?
I think so. It feels more urgent. It feels like people are desperate for the pandemic to end. That even with the vaccines and the way that they were rolled out, the fact that people, because equity wasn't being concerned, it was more about how first it wasn't efficient, and then once efficiency became an issue, then equity was sort of put on the shelf, and now it's back. People are talking about that. So there's all these concerns about how to survive the pandemic and to be safe and to not lose their homes. And I think that evictions have been one of the number one calls that we've been getting, as in people are finding themselves faced with homelessness, and we don't have the ability to advocate for them to say, like, well, you can't do that because the rules aren't in place. The rules that were put in place have gaping holes in them, and so people are taking advantage. Like when I hear people saying that that this is a seller's market, how can this be a seller's market when people are facing eviction and homelessness? And I think that would be my number one issue that I think that we're facing right now is housing, and in different levels too, like from renters to people who can't make their mortgage payments to having to, and even can you imagine having to sell your place and having people come into your home in the middle of a pandemic in order to sell and to, you know what I mean, because you can't make mortgage payments, or having to move in with other people and start sharing and having roommates because suddenly you can't make those payments. I mean, it goes on.
And then trying to balance all of that out if you have children with trying to be online for them, right? And trying to make sure that the kids are doing this synchronous portion of their learning.
And how it's not manageable. And those supports that when this is the time when you have to feel like you can count on the government and count on them to provide the types of support so that you don't fall through the cracks. And this is the cracks are huge at the moment.
It's not, we're not in, I think the other challenge is that we're having this conversation and we're not at the peak of wave 2. We're still sort of in the middle of it. And we're hopeful that we will be able to stay strong and get through the rest of this together. I don't want us to have this conversation so that we put more tension and anxiety into the universe. I just want us to have the conversation so that we hold each other, so that people don't feel like they're experiencing these ideas or these thoughts on their own, so that they know even from my office, from our office, we're seeing and hearing similar concerns, but that we're there, right? I think if there's anything that I'd like to leave this conversation off on, it's just to let folks know we're there. And as trite as it sometimes sounds, we are in this together, and we will get through this together. And I do want folks to know that they can reach out to us anytime and that they've got real people on the other end of their computers if they're emailing us, or on the telephone if they're leaving us messages. And truly, we will do everything in our power to try and help.
Absolutely. And I think even when we're hearing about healthcare workers who are they're ending their lives over this. Farmers are ending their lives over this. And so if we don't provide that kind of community support and coming together right now, we're going to see we're not going to fare well. And I think we can fight this, and we can come together, and we'll do what's necessary in order to keep each other safe. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Zahra, for being open to have a last-minute, on-the-fly conversation live on YouTube with me.
Well, thank you.
StreamYard. This has been like super cool. So yeah, there will be more of these little conversations to come. But for now, we will say goodbye, and definitely reach out to my office anytime if you need anything.
Bye.